The auction block felt like a gallows beneath Wilhelmina Davies' feet, her heart hammering against her ribs as the jeering crowd of men assessed her like cattle at market. 3 months ago, she'd been a respected shopkeeper's wife in Shafter, Texas. Now she was property being sold to cover her husband's debts after he'd fled town with another woman, and every cent they'd ever earned. "Next up, gentlemen," the auctioneer bellowed, his voice cutting through the smoky saloon, "a fine woman of 22 years. Can cook, clean, and run a shop. Starting bid is $50 to cover outstanding debts." Wilhelmina fought to keep her chin high despite the shame burning her cheeks. The summer of 1878 was proving to be the cruelest of her life. Her cotton dress, once crisp and proper, now hung limply in the stifling June heat. She'd never imagined ending up here when she'd followed her husband Roland west from Philadelphia 5 years ago, stars in her eyes and promises in her heart. $50, called a gruff voice from the back. 60, countered another, belonging to the owner of the Silver Mine Saloon. Wilhelmina suppressed a shudder, knowing exactly what kind of work he'd expect from her. $100, came a clear, steady voice from the doorway. The crowd parted, revealing a tall figure silhouetted against the harsh Texas sunlight. As he stepped forward, Wilhelmina could make out a weather-beaten face beneath a dust-covered Stetson. He wasn't young, perhaps 35, but he stood with the easy confidence of a man comfortable in his own skin. His eyes, startlingly blue against his sun-darkened face, assessed her with none of the leering hunger she'd seen in the others. 100 from Isaac Jameson, the auctioneer announced with surprise. "The cattle rancher's bidding, gentlemen." 110, countered the saloon owner, eyes narrowing. 150, Isaac replied without hesitation. The saloon keeper muttered something under his breath but shook his head. "Any other bids?" The auctioneer glanced around. "Going once, going twice." "Sold to Isaac Jameson for $150. As Wilhelmina was led from the block, Isaac Jameson approached, removing his hat in a gesture of respect that stunned her after hours of being ogled like merchandise. "Mrs. Davies," he said quietly, using her proper name rather than treating her as property already. "My ranch is about 10 miles outside of town. I need someone to cook and keep house." His eyes met hers directly. "That is all I will expect of you." Before she could respond, he turned to complete the transaction. Wilhelmina stood frozen, uncertain whether to feel relief or simply a different kind of fear. As he returned, he offered her his canteen. "Water. It's a hot day for standing in the sun." She accepted with trembling hands, the cool liquid a blessing on her parched throat. "Thank you, Mr. Jameson." "Isaac," he corrected gently, retrieving his canteen. "My wagon's out front. We should get going before the worst of the afternoon heat." As they walked toward the door, the saloon keeper stepped into their path. "Mighty generous bid for a housekeeper, Jameson. Sure that's all you want her for?" The implied vulgarity hung in the air. Something dangerous flashed in Isaac's eyes. "Any man who leaves a woman like Mrs. Davies is a fool," he said, his voice deceptively soft. "Any man who disrespects her in my presence is making an even bigger mistake." The saloon keeper backed away, hands raised in mock surrender. Outside, Isaac helped Wilhelmina into a well-maintained wagon. Her single trunk, all she'd been allowed to keep from her former life, was already loaded in the back. "I'm sorry about that," Isaac said as he climbed up beside her. "Town's been rough since the silver mine started bringing in a certain element." Wilhelmina clutched her hands in her lap, fighting tears of humiliation. "I should be thanking you, I suppose, for purchasing me." Isaac clicked his tongue, setting the horses in motion. "I didn't purchase you, Mrs. Davies. I paid off your husband's debts. There's a difference." "Please," she whispered, Call me Wilhelmina or Willa. After today, I don't think I can bear being called Mrs. Davies anymore." Isaac glanced at her, something like compassion crossing his features. "Willa, then." He returned his attention to the road ahead. "And you're not property. Once we reach my ranch, you'll have a job with fair pay. When you've saved enough, you're free to leave if you want." The wagon rattled down Shafter's Main Street, passing the general store she'd helped run for 5 years. Wilhelmina turned her face away, unable to bear the memories. "Why?" she finally asked as the town receded behind them. "Why what? Why would you pay so much? You don't know me." Isaac was silent for so long that Wilhelmina thought he might not answer. When he did, his voice was thoughtful. "I know enough. I've seen you in town, working that shop dawn to dusk. Treating everyone fair, even when your husband was." He paused. "Well, town gossip isn't always wrong, and nobody deserves to be sold off because someone else broke their promises." The simple truth of his words broke something inside her. Tears she'd refused to shed in public spilled down her cheeks. Isaac pretended not to notice, giving her the dignity of private grief as they traveled toward what would be her new home, at least for now. The road wound through mesquite and scrub oak, climbing gradually into rolling hills dotted with live oak and cedar. After about an hour, they crested a rise, and the Jameson Ranch spread out before them, a modest but well-maintained house. A large barn, corrals, and beyond, cattle grazing on surprisingly green pastureland. "Water rights to Cottonwood Creek," Isaac explained, following her gaze. "Makes all the difference out here." As they approached, a young man emerged from the barn waving. "That's Thomas," Isaac said. "My ranch hand. Good kid, about 19. His mother was Comanche. He helps with the cattle and horses." Thomas jogged over as the wagon stopped in front of the house. "Got the north pasture fence fixed, Mr. Jameson," he reported, then glanced curiously at Wilhelmina. "Thomas, this is Miss Willa. She'll be keeping house for us." Isaac jumped down from the wagon. "Would you mind bringing her trunk inside while I show her around?" "Yes, sir." The young man tipped his hat politely to Wilhelmina before moving to the back of the wagon. Isaac offered his hand to help her down. "It's not much, but it's peaceful. The house has been lacking a woman's touch since my mother passed 3 years ago." The house was surprisingly large for a bachelor rancher, a central living area with a stone fireplace, a kitchen with a good cookstove, and 4 bedrooms off a short hallway. "My parents built it with family in mind," Isaac explained, seeing her surprise at the size. "My mother always hoped for grandchildren to fill the rooms." A shadow crossed his face. "This will be your room." He opened a door to reveal a pleasant bedroom with a real bed, not just a cot, a chest of drawers, and a small writing desk beneath a window that overlooked a kitchen garden. "The room across the hall is mine," Isaac continued. "The door has a lock if that makes you more comfortable. At the end of the hall is a bathing room. We have running water pumped from the well." Wilhelmina was startled by this luxury. "Running water," Isaac almost smiled. "My father was an engineer before he caught gold fever in '49. Some of his ideas actually worked. The windmill pumps water to a tank on the roof." Thomas appeared with her trunk, setting it carefully by the bed. "Anything else, Mr. Jameson?" "That's all. Thank you, Thomas." After the young man left, Isaac lingered in the doorway. "I'll leave you to settle in. Supper's usually at 6, but there's no rush today. Rest if you need to." He paused. "Willa, I meant what I said in town. You're not property here. You're an employee entitled to fair treatment and wages." The kindness in his voice nearly undid her again. "Thank you," she managed. When he'd gone, Wilhelmina sank onto the bed, overwhelmed by the day's events and the stranger's unexpected decency. She allowed herself 10 minutes of quiet tears before rising to splash water on her face from the basin on the dresser. Then she unpacked her meager belongings, changed into a fresh dress, and went to see what she could prepare for the evening meal. If she was to be a housekeeper, she would be a good one. The kitchen was well stocked with basic staples: flour, sugar, coffee, beans, and bacon. In a small cold room off the kitchen, she found eggs, butter, and even some beef. Whoever had been cooking, Isaac himself, she presumed, kept things organized, if not particularly clean. By 6 o'clock, Wilhelmina had prepared a simple but hearty meal of beef stew, cornbread, and apple cobbler made from dried apples she'd found in the pantry. The kitchen table was set for 3. She assumed Thomas would join them, and the coffee pot was simmering on the stove. Isaac entered, hat in hand, looking somewhat startled at the transformation. "You didn't have to cook today," he said, but the appreciation in his eyes was evident as he inhaled the aromas filling the kitchen. "I wanted to earn my keep right away," she replied simply. Thomas arrived moments later, and they sat down to eat. The meal passed with minimal conversation at first, both men seeming unused to female company. Finally, Isaac broke the awkward silence. "The stew is excellent, better than anything I've managed in years." "Thank you." Wilhelmina hesitated. "Mr. Jameson, Isaac," he corrected gently. "Isaac. I would like to know my duties. And my wages." The last word was difficult to say. She'd never been paid for her work before. Her labor at the store had simply been expected as Roland's wife. Isaac set down his fork. "Cooking, keeping the house in order, laundry, nothing beyond what's reasonable. Sundays off unless there's roundup or some other emergency. As for wages..." He named a monthly sum that startled her with its generosity. "That's too much," she protested. "It's fair," he countered. "You'll earn it. This place needs someone who knows what they're doing." Later, after Thomas had returned to his quarters in the bunkhouse and the dishes were washed, Wilhelmina sat on the porch, watching darkness settle over the hills. The night air was cooler than in town, carrying the scent of cedar and distant rain. Isaac emerged from the house, a cup of coffee in each hand. He offered one to her silently before settling into the chair beside her, a respectful distance away. "May I ask you something personal?" he said after several minutes of companionable silence. Wilhelmina tensed but nodded. "How did you end up on that auction block today?" She stared into her coffee, the pain still fresh. "My husband, Roland, left 3 weeks ago. With another woman, a saloon girl, and all our money. Even the store wasn't truly ours. He'd been borrowing against it. When the bank came to collect and found nothing of value." She shrugged, the simple gesture hiding a world of hurt. "The law says a husband's debts are a wife's responsibility." Isaac's hand tightened around his cup. "That's not right." "Perhaps not, but it's legal." She took a careful sip of coffee. "May I ask you something in return?" He nodded. "Why would a man like you have no wife? This is a good ranch and you seem..." She faltered, unsure how to phrase it without sounding forward. "Kind." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "I was engaged once, about 10 years ago. She decided Texas was too wild, too far from civilization. Went back east." He gazed out at the darkening landscape. "After that, I guess I just got used to my own company. This land keeps a man busy enough." They sat in silence after that, each lost in their own thoughts until Wilhelmina stifled a yawn. "You should rest," Isaac said, rising. "It's been a long day." As she prepared for bed in her new room, Wilhelmina found herself thinking about the strange turn her life had taken. From respected shopkeeper's wife to auction block to whatever this arrangement was. Not salvation. Exactly, she was still essentially in servitude, but perhaps a chance to rebuild something from the ashes of her former life. And her new employer, With his quiet dignity and unexpected kindness, she didn't quite know what to make of Isaac Jameson. All she knew was that for the first time in weeks, she fell asleep without fear gnawing at her heart. The days settled into a rhythm at the Jameson ranch. Wilhelmina rose early, prepared breakfast for the men, then spent her days cleaning, cooking, and gradually bringing order to a house that had clearly lacked a woman's touch for some time. Isaac was usually gone from dawn until dusk, working with the cattle or riding the boundaries of his property. Thomas often assisted him, but sometimes worked on repairs closer to the house. Despite her initial wariness, Wilhelmina found herself growing comfortable in her new surroundings. Isaac was unfailingly respectful, never entering her room without invitation and always knocking before coming into any space where she might be working. Thomas was shy but unfailingly polite, often bringing her wildflowers he'd found while riding or small game he'd hunted that might supplement their meals. It was Thomas who gradually filled in the gaps in her knowledge about Isaac Jameson. His father brought the family here when Mr. Jameson was just a boy, Thomas explained one afternoon as he helped her hang laundry. Built everything from nothing. Mr. Jameson went to school back east for a couple years engineering, like his pa, but came home when his father fell ill. Been running this place ever since. He seems very capable, Wilhelmina observed, pinning a shirt to the line. Thomas nodded. Best rancher in the county, fair too. Hired me when nobody else would on account of my mother. He glanced at her. People around here don't always take kindly to half-breeds. That's their loss, she replied firmly. The young man's face brightened. That's what Mr. Jameson said too. As July progressed, Wilhelmina began venturing beyond the immediate surroundings of the house. She discovered the small family cemetery where Isaac's parents were buried, a spring-fed pond shaded by ancient cottonwoods, and the remnants of what had once been an ambitious garden. One evening, about 3 weeks after her arrival, Isaac found her studying the overgrown garden plot. "My mother's pride and joy," he said, coming to stand beside her. "I haven't had the heart to do much with it since she passed." "It could be beautiful again," Wilhelmina observed. "The soil looks rich, and with your water system." "Would you like to try?" Isaac asked. "I could help you clear it on Sunday." The offer surprised her. "You wouldn't mind?" "Mind, I'd welcome it. Nothing sadder than seeing something that was once loved fall into neglect." Something in his tone made her wonder if he was speaking about more than just the garden. True to his word, that Sunday Isaac helped her clear weeds and turn the soil in the old garden. It was hard work under the July sun, but somehow restorative to be creating rather than merely maintaining. "What would you like to plant?" Isaac asked as they paused to drink water from the well. "Is it too late for summer vegetables?" "Not here. Growing season's long enough for another crop of most things. I can take you into town tomorrow to get seeds if you'd like." The prospect of returning to Shafter filled Wilhelmina with apprehension. "I don't know if I'm ready to face those people again." Isaac studied her for a moment. "You've nothing to be ashamed of, Willa, but I understand. I can go alone if you prefer." "No," she decided suddenly. "I need to face it sometime. I'll go." The next morning they set out for town in the wagon. Wilhelmina wore her best dress, one of only 3 she still owned, and a bonnet that shaded her face from both the sun and curious eyes. As they approached Shafter, her anxiety increased. This place held nothing but painful memories now: her husband's betrayal, the humiliating auction, the loss of everything she'd worked for. Isaac seemed to sense her tension. "We won't stay long," he promised. "Just the general store for seeds and any supplies you need for the house." The town was relatively quiet on a Monday morning. A few people on the boardwalks glanced their way, some nodding to Isaac, others looking curiously at Wilhelmina. She kept her head high despite the whispers that followed them. At the general store, the proprietor greeted Isaac warmly. "Mr. Jameson, good to see you. What can I help you with today?" "Seeds for a vegetable garden," Isaac replied, "and whatever household supplies Miss Willer requires." The storekeeper's eyes widened slightly in recognition as he looked at Wilhelmina. "Mrs. Davies, we heard you'd left town." "Miss Willa works for me now," Isaac said firmly, emphasizing her preferred name and status. "She's reviving my mother's garden." The man's awkwardness was palpable. "Of course. Well, we have plenty of seeds, and if you're looking for canning jars for later in the season, I just got a shipment in." As they gathered supplies, Wilhelmina felt herself relaxing slightly. The storekeeper treated her with professional courtesy, and Isaac's solid presence beside her provided an unexpected sense of security. Their business was nearly complete when the store's door opened, and a familiar figure stepped in. Bertram Wells, the banker who had seized her home and shop after Roland's disappearance. "Jameson," Wells acknowledged with a nod, then his gaze fell on Wilhelmina. A smirk touched his lips. "Mrs. Davies, or is it still Mrs.? Hard to know when a husband simply vanishes." Wilhelmina felt the blood drain from her face. "It's Miss Willa now," Isaac said, his voice dangerously quiet, "and she's under my protection." "Protection?" Wells raised an eyebrow. "Is that what they're calling it these days? Although I suppose technically, since you bought her fair and square." Isaac moved so quickly that Wilhelmina barely registered it, until Wells was backed against the door, Isaac's forearm across his throat. "Choose your next words very carefully," Isaac warned, his voice barely above a whisper. "This lady has suffered enough indignities without your insinuations." Wells' face reddened, partly from the pressure on his throat, partly from anger or embarrassment. "Unhand me, Jameson. I meant no offense." "Apologize to the lady." Wells glared but complied. "My apologies, Miss Willa. No offense intended." Isaac released him and stepped back. "We'll take our business elsewhere in the future if that's how customers are treated here," he told the storekeeper, who had watched the exchange with wide eyes. "No need for that, Mr. Jameson," the storekeeper assured him hastily. "Mr. Wells was just leaving, weren't you, sir?" The banker straightened his jacket, shot a venomous look at Isaac, and departed without another word. The ride back to the ranch was quiet at first. Wilhelmina's emotions were a tangled mess: humiliation at being reminded of her public auction, gratitude for Isaac's defense, and a strange flutter in her chest when she recalled the intensity in his eyes as he confronted Wells. "Thank you," she finally said, as the town disappeared behind them. "For what you did back there." Isaac kept his eyes on the road. "No man should speak to a lady that way. Still, you didn't have to defend me. Many employers wouldn't have." "I'm not many employers," he glanced at her briefly. "And you're not just an employee, Willa. You're—" He seemed to search for the right word. "You're under my roof. That makes you family of sorts." The concept of being considered family, even of sorts, brought an unexpected lump to Wilhelmina's throat. She'd had no real family since her parents died when she was 17, just Roland, who had proven to be no family at all. Back at the ranch, they planted the garden together that evening. As they worked side by side in the rich soil, Wilhelmina found herself studying Isaac when he wasn't looking: the strong lines of his profile, the careful gentleness of his hands as he placed seeds in the ground, the quiet concentration in his eyes. For the first time since Roland's betrayal, she felt a dangerous stirring in her heart: not just gratitude, but something warmer and more frightening. She turned away quickly when Isaac glanced up, focusing intently on the seed packet in her hands. This attraction was the last thing she needed. She was still technically a married woman for all she knew. And Isaac was her employer, her rescuer, not a potential suitor. Besides, after Roland's betrayal, how could she ever trust her judgment about men again? Yet that night, as she lay in bed listening to the distant call of coyotes, Wilhelmina couldn't help but remember the fierce protectiveness in Isaac's eyes in the general store, and the gentle way he'd taught her to plant tomato seedlings. Perhaps, she thought as sleep claimed her, not all men were like Roland Davies after all. August brought searing heat to the Texas hill country. Wilhelmina rose earlier each day to complete her heaviest work before the worst of the afternoon sun. The garden thrived under her care, already producing lettuce, radishes, and early beans. Isaac built her a small shade structure to protect tender seedlings from the relentless sun, and Thomas dug irrigation channels from the windmill's overflow to keep the soil moist. One sweltering afternoon, Wilhelmina was preparing to bake bread when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Through the kitchen window, she saw a rider approaching, not Isaac or Thomas, but a stranger. As the rider drew closer, her heart froze. Even after 5 months, she would recognize that posture, that way of sitting a horse, anywhere. Roland Davies had returned to Texas. Her first instinct was to hide, but pride kept her rooted to the spot as her estranged husband dismounted and approached the house. He looked thinner than when he'd left, his once fine clothes now dusty and worn. The cockiness in his stride was diminished but still present. Wilhelmina stepped onto the porch, wiping flour from her hands, her heart pounding. "Willa," Roland called, attempting his old charming smile. "You're a sight for sore eyes. What are you doing here, Roland?" Her voice was steadier than she felt, "Looking for my wife, of course." He mounted the steps, stopping when he saw her instinctive step backward. "I heard in town you'd been sold." His expression darkened. "To Isaac Jameson." "Mr. Jameson paid the debts you left me with," she corrected coldly, "and gave me honest employment." Roland snorted. "Employment? Is that what they're calling it? The whole town thinks you're his. I would consider very carefully how you finish that sentence, Davies." Isaac's voice came from behind Roland. He had approached silently, rifle in hand, his expression harder than Wilhelmina had ever seen it. Roland turned, his hand instinctively moving toward his hip before he thought better of it. "Jameson, this doesn't concern you. I've come for my wife." "Seems to me you gave up any claim to her when you abandoned her with a mountain of debt," Isaac replied evenly. "Where's the saloon girl you ran off with? And the money you stole?" Roland's face flushed. "Things didn't work out, but Willa's still my wife legally. I've come to make amends." Wilhelmina laughed bitterly. "Amends? You left me to be sold like livestock. There are no amends for that." "I didn't know it would go that far," Roland protested. "I thought you'd manage somehow. You always do." "You need to leave," Isaac said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Now." Roland straightened. "Not without my wife. I have rights. You have nothing," Isaac cut in. "And if you set foot on my property again, I'll have you arrested for trespassing." For a tense moment, the two men stared at each other. Then Roland's gaze shifted to Wilhelmina, a calculating look she recognized all too well crossing his face. "Willa, darling, be reasonable. Whatever he's paying you, I can do better. I've got prospects, a business opportunity in Fort Worth. All I need is a little stake to get started." The audacity of it, returning not out of remorse or love, but because he needed money, was so typical that Wilhelmina almost laughed again. "You've gotten all you'll ever get from me, Roland. Please go." His expression hardened. "You're choosing him over your own husband, after just a few months." "I always suspected you were no better than you should be." Isaac moved so quickly that Roland had no time to react. One moment he was spewing venom, the next he was on his back in the dirt, blood streaming from his nose. "That's for what you did to her," Isaac said calmly, standing over him. And this, he cocked the rifle, pointing it at Roland's chest, is to make sure you understand what happens if you ever come near her again. Roland scrambled backward, fumbling to his feet. "You're making a mistake, Willa," he called as he stumbled toward his horse. "He can't give you what I can. We had a life together." "Yes, we did," she called back, finding her voice at last. "And you destroyed it. Goodbye, Roland." They watched in silence as he mounted and rode away, his once proud figure diminished by defeat and the vast landscape that swallowed him. When he was out of sight, Wilhelmina's legs nearly buckled. Isaac was beside her instantly, his arm supporting her as he guided her to a chair on the porch. "Are you all right?" His voice was gentle again, all the steel gone now that the threat was removed. "I don't know." She looked up at him, seeing the concern in his eyes. "I always thought if I ever saw him again I'd have more to say, or that I'd feel something, anger, hatred, something, but I felt nothing, just pity maybe." Isaac sat beside her, setting the rifle aside. "That's probably for the best." "He'll be back," she said with certainty. "Not because he wants me, but because he needs money. Roland always finds a way to get what he wants. Not this time." Isaac's jaw tightened. "I meant what I said, Willa. He won't harm you again, not while I'm alive." The fierce protectiveness in his voice warmed something deep inside her. For the first time since Roland's abandonment, Wilhelmina felt truly safe. "Thank you," she said simply, unable to express the depth of her gratitude. They sat in companionable silence as the sun began to set, painting the hills in gold and crimson. Something had shifted between them, though neither acknowledged it aloud. The threat of Roland's return hung in the air, but so did something else, something fragile and new, a possibility neither was quite ready to name. That night, Wilhelmina lay awake long after the house had gone quiet, replaying the day's events. Seeing Roland again had affected her less than she'd expected. The man who had once been the center of her world now seemed like a stranger, and a rather pitiful one at that. More confusing were her feelings about Isaac. The way he had defended her, the gentle strength in his hands as he'd helped her to the chair, the concern in his eyes, all of it had stirred emotions she'd thought long buried after Roland's betrayal. But she was still a married woman, technically, if not in her heart. And even if she weren't, would Isaac see her as anything more than a responsibility, a woman he'd rescued from a terrible fate? The thought of misreading his kindness as something more made her cheeks burn with embarrassment. Better to focus on the present, she decided. On building a new life, saving her wages, becoming self-sufficient again. Romance, if it ever came again, would have to wait. September brought slightly cooler temperatures and a burst of productivity in the garden. Wilhelmina spent hours harvesting, canning and preserving, grateful for the physical labor that left her too tired to dwell on complicated emotions. Isaac seemed to be maintaining a careful distance since Roland's visit. He was unfailingly polite, even warm in their daily interactions, but something had changed. The easy companionship of their garden planting days seemed more guarded now. "He's afraid," Thomas told her one afternoon as he helped her pick beans. "Afraid of what?" Wilhelmina asked, startled by the young man's insight. Thomas shrugged. "Of caring too much, I reckon. Mr. Jameson doesn't let many people get close, not since Miss Caroline left him." Caroline. The name was new to her. His fiancée that went back east. Broke his heart, something fierce. "He doesn't talk about it, but my mother used to work here back then. Said he was never the same after." The information gave Wilhelmina pause. Perhaps Isaac's reserve wasn't about her at all, but about his own past wounds. Her opportunity to test this theory came unexpectedly a week later. A sudden autumn storm blew in, bringing much-needed rain but also violent winds that damaged one of the barn's support beams. Isaac and Thomas worked frantically to secure it before the entire structure could collapse. Wilhelmina watched from the kitchen window, worry gnawing at her as lightning illuminated their struggling figures. When she saw Isaac slip in the mud and fall hard, she didn't think twice before grabbing a lantern and running out into the downpour. "Isaac," she called over the howling wind. "Are you hurt?" He was trying to stand, grimacing in pain. "Stay back," he warned. "It's not safe." "Neither is trying to work with an injury," she countered, reaching his side and offering her shoulder for support. "Let me help you to the house." For once, he didn't argue. With Thomas's help, they got Isaac inside and settled in a chair by the fire. His right ankle was already swelling and a gash on his forearm was bleeding freely. "Thomas, can you finish securing that beam?" Isaac asked through gritted teeth. "Yes, sir. Already got it mostly done." "Be careful," Isaac and Wilhelmina said simultaneously, then glanced at each other in surprise. After Thomas left, Wilhelmina gathered medical supplies. "Your boots need to come off," she said, kneeling beside Isaac's chair. "And that cut needs cleaning." "I can manage," he began, but she silenced him with a look. "You would let Thomas help you. Let me do the same." Something in her tone must have convinced him. He submitted to her ministrations as she gently removed his boot, cleaned and bandaged the cut on his arm, and wrapped his ankle with strips of clean cloth. "I don't think it's broken," she said, her fingers carefully probing the swollen joint. "But you should stay off it for a few days." "Can't afford to," he muttered. "Roundup's coming, and Thomas can handle the essential work for a day or two," she interrupted. "Unless you want to risk being laid up for weeks instead." Their eyes met, challenge clear in hers. To her surprise, Isaac chuckled. "You're formidable when you're concerned, Willa." The use of her name, the warmth in his voice, the intimacy of kneeling beside him with her hands still resting lightly on his injured ankle, all of it sent heat rushing to her cheeks. "Only when someone I care about is being stubborn," she replied, the words escaping before she could consider their implication. Isaac's expression changed, something unreadable flickering in his eyes. "Willa," the door burst open as Thomas returned, dripping wet but triumphant. "Beams secured, Mr. Jameson. Barnes safe." The moment between them shattered. Wilhelmina rose quickly, gathering the medical supplies. "I'll make some hot coffee," she said, retreating to the kitchen. Later, after Thomas had gone to the bunkhouse and Isaac was settled in his room with strict instructions to stay off his ankle, Wilhelmina sat alone by the dying fire. The interrupted moment in the storm's aftermath haunted her. What had Isaac been about to say? And had she imagined the intensity in his eyes? Or was Thomas right about his fear of caring again? More importantly, what did she want? Her life had been upended so completely that sometimes it was hard to remember who she had been before Roland's betrayal, before the auction block, before Isaac. The one thing she knew with certainty was that her feelings for her employer had grown far beyond gratitude. But whether anything could come of those feelings remained as unclear as the storm-darkened night outside. Over the next few days, Isaac's forced confinement to the house created a new kind of tension between them. Unused to inactivity, he was by turns irritable and apologetic, while Wilhelmina found herself hyper-aware of his presence in spaces that had previously been her domain during daylight hours. They established an uneasy routine. In the mornings, she helped him to a chair on the porch where he could at least oversee Thomas's work with the cattle. In the afternoons, he attempted paperwork at the kitchen table while she prepared meals and preserved the garden's continuing bounty. Their conversations remained carefully casual, though sometimes she would look up from her work to find his eyes on her, quickly averted when she noticed. On the third day of this arrangement, A letter arrived from town delivered by the weekly mail rider who serviced the outlying ranches. It was addressed to Wilhelmina, the handwriting unmistakably Roland's. She stared at it, her hands trembling slightly. "Bad news?" Isaac asked from his place at the table, watching her reaction carefully. "I don't know yet." She broke the seal and unfolded the single page, reading quickly. "My dearest Wilhelmina, by the time you receive this, I will be in Mexico. Circumstances have made it necessary for me to leave Texas with some haste. I doubt we will meet again in this life. I am not a sentimental man, as you well know, but I feel I owe you this much: your freedom. Enclosed is a document granting you divorce on grounds of abandonment. I have signed it. Have it witnessed and file it with the county clerk, and you will be free to make whatever life you choose, even with that self-righteous rancher who seems so taken with you. Consider it my final gift to you, though I know you will not think of it as such. We were ill-suited from the start, though it took me years to realize it. May you find the happiness I could never give you." Roland, a smaller document, was folded inside a simple but legally worded statement acknowledging abandonment and relinquishing all marital claims. Roland's signature was at the bottom, the ink still relatively fresh. Wilhelmina read it twice, hardly daring to believe what it meant. Freedom. Legal, uncontested freedom from the man who had brought her such misery. "Willa," Isaac's voice broke through her shock, "is everything all right?" "Yes," she said faintly, looking up at him with wonder in her eyes. "Better than all right. Roland has gone to Mexico, and he signed divorce papers." Isaac's expression was unreadable. "That's unexpected. He says circumstances made it necessary for him to leave Texas quickly." She gave a small, humorless laugh, "which likely means he's in trouble with the law or someone even more dangerous. Are you all right?" Isaac asked, his voice gentler now. "It must be strange after everything." "It's—" She searched for the right word. "Liberating. I've been living in limbo, legally bound to a man who abandoned me. Now I can truly start over." Something flickered in Isaac's eyes, hope, perhaps, or uncertainty. "What will you do?" The question caught her off guard. "Do? Now that you're free? Will you stay in Texas, go back east?" He hesitated. "You've saved most of your wages. You could start over somewhere if that's what you want." Wilhelmina studied him, suddenly understanding the real question beneath his words. "Are you asking if I plan to leave the ranch, Isaac?" Their eyes met across the kitchen, the moment stretching between them like a physical thing. "I suppose I am," he admitted quietly. "You want me to leave?" Her heart hammered in her chest as she awaited his answer. Isaac's gaze didn't waver. "No, but I want you to stay because you choose to, not because you have nowhere else to go." The honesty in his words moved her deeply. "I've grown to care about this place," she said carefully. "About the garden. The house." She took a deep breath. "About you." The last words were barely above a whisper, but they changed everything. Isaac pushed back from the table, standing despite his injured ankle, and crossed the kitchen to where she stood. "Willa," he said softly, taking her hands in his. "I've wanted to speak to you for weeks, but you were still married, and I would never—" He broke off, struggling for words. "I know it's too soon. You've barely had time to process everything that's happened. But I need you to know that my feelings for you have grown far beyond employer and housekeeper." Wilhelmina felt dizzy with the sudden shift in their relationship. After months of careful distance, of unspoken feelings and uncertainty, the truth was finally in the open. "I thought perhaps you only felt responsible for me," she admitted. "That your kindness was just your nature, not something more." Isaac's smile was tender. "It began as responsibility, I won't deny that. But somewhere between planting that garden and watching you face down your past with such courage, everything changed." His hand gently touched her cheek. I fell in love with you, Willa Davies, and that terrified me because I had no right to those feelings while you belonged to another man. I never truly belonged to Roland, she whispered. Not in the ways that matter. Their first kiss was tentative, gentle a question as much as an answer. When they drew apart, the wonder in Isaac's eyes mirrored what Wilhelmina felt in her own heart. We should take this slowly, Isaac said, though his hand still held hers as if afraid she might disappear. You've been through so much, and Wilhelmina silenced him with another kiss, this one more certain. We've both waited long enough for happiness, she said when they parted. I don't want to waste any more time being cautious. From that day forward, everything changed between them, and yet nothing did. They still worked side by side as before, but now with the freedom to exchange glances that lingered, touches that spoke volumes, and conversations that stretched late into the evening as they shared the stories of their lives before they had met. Isaac told her about Caroline, the Boston-bred fiancée who had found ranch life impossibly primitive and eventually returned east, breaking their engagement and his heart. Wilhelmina shared the full story of her marriage to Roland, how she'd been swept off her feet at 19 by his charm and promises, only to discover his true nature after they'd moved west. I was so blind, she confessed one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. Even when the signs were there, the gambling, the other women, the reckless spending, I made excuses for him. I thought if I just loved him enough, worked hard enough, he'd change. Isaac took her hand, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm. That's not blindness, Willa. It's hope. And there's nothing shameful in that. October brought cooler weather and the final harvest from the garden. The ranch's rhythms shifted as Isaac and Thomas prepared the cattle for the coming winter, repairing fences and stocking hay. Word of Roland's divorce papers spread quickly through Shafter, as small-town gossip inevitably did. Some whispers undoubtedly questioned the propriety of Wilhelmina living under Isaac's roof now that her marital status was changing. But if Isaac heard such talk during his trips to town, he never mentioned it to her. What he did mention, one crisp Sunday afternoon as they walked along Cottonwood Creek, was a more permanent arrangement. I've been thinking, he began, his voice unusually hesitant, about the future, about us. Wilhelmina's heart quickened. What about us? Isaac stopped walking, turning to face her fully. The autumn sunlight caught in his dark hair, highlighting the touches of silver at his temples that she had come to find so distinguished. I love you, Willa, more than I thought possible after Caroline left. I want to build a life with you not as my housekeeper, but as my wife. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object. This was my mother's. I'd be honored if you'd wear it. The ring was simple but beautiful, a gold band set with a small pearl surrounded by tiny diamonds. It spoke of understated elegance, much like the woman who had originally worn it, Isaac. Emotion closed Wilhelmina's throat as tears blurred her vision. A shadow of uncertainty crossed his face. I know it's fast. Your divorce isn't even final yet. If you need time, yes, she interrupted, finding her voice at last. Yes, I'll marry you, as soon as the divorce is final. The joy that transformed his features was something Wilhelmina knew she would remember for the rest of her life. As he slipped the ring onto her finger and pulled her into his arms, she marveled at how completely her life had changed in just a few months. From the auction block to this moment of perfect happiness, it was a journey she could never have imagined. Yet somehow, through all the pain and uncertainty, she had found her way to where she was always meant to be. The county clerk processed Roland's divorce papers with surprising efficiency, perhaps helped along by a generous donation Isaac made to the courthouse renovation fund. By early November, Wilhelmina Davies was legally a free woman again. They married on Thanksgiving Day, 1878, in a small ceremony at the ranch. The local minister officiated, with Thomas serving as Isaac's best man and Martha Holloway, the minister's wife, standing up for Wilhelmina. A few neighbors and acquaintances from town attended, including the storekeeper who had witnessed their confrontation with Wells months earlier. "You look beautiful," Isaac whispered as they stood together before the minister, and Wilhelmina knew he meant it, despite her simple dress and the wildflowers in her hair instead of a fancy bridal wreath. The celebration afterward was modest but joyful, a feast prepared by Wilhelmina with help from the neighboring women, music from a fiddle played by one of the ranchers, and dancing in the yard as twilight descended. As they swayed together beneath lantern light, Isaac held her close. "Happy Mrs. Jameson," the name sent a thrill through her. "More than I ever thought possible," she answered truthfully. "And you?" His smile was answer enough, but he kissed her softly before adding, "I think my parents would be pleased to see the house filled with life again, with love." Later, when the guests had departed and they were finally alone, there was a moment of shyness between them despite the months of growing closeness. Isaac sensed her nervousness and took her hands gently in his. "We have all the time in the world, Willa," he assured her. "Nothing happens tonight that you don't want." His consideration nearly undid her. After years with Roland, who had taken what he wanted with little regard for her feelings, Isaac's patience and respect were still sometimes overwhelming. "I want to be your wife in every way," she told him softly. It's been a while, and Roland was never particularly gentle," Isaac supplied when she faltered. At her nod, he cupped her face in his hands. "I will never hurt you, Willa, not in any way. We'll learn together what brings you joy." And they did, through that night and the days and weeks that followed, discovering in each other a passion neither had fully experienced before, one built on deep respect, genuine affection, and the kind of trust that only comes when two people truly see each other. Winter settled over the Texas hill country, bringing occasional freezing rain and rare snowfalls that transformed the landscape into something magical. The ranch house, which had once seemed too large for just Isaac, now felt perfectly sized for a family beginning to grow. Christmas brought a special announcement. As they sat before the fire on Christmas Eve, Wilhelmina placed Isaac's hand on her still flat abdomen. "I think," she said with a mixture of excitement and trepidation, "that we might need to prepare the nursery sooner than we expected." The wonder that spread across Isaac's face was everything she had hoped for. "A baby? Are you certain?" "As certain as one can be at this stage. If I'm right, we should welcome our child in early summer." Isaac gathered her into his arms, his joy palpable. "I never thought—" he began, then had to stop to collect himself. "After Caroline left, I resigned myself to being alone, to never having children. And now we'll have the family your mother always wanted for this house," Wilhelmina completed, her own eyes damp with happy tears. News of the pregnancy spread quickly through the small community. Martha Holloway organized the neighboring ranch wives to sew baby clothes and blankets. Thomas carved a beautiful wooden cradle, shyly presenting it to them on a snowy January evening. "It's a Comanche design," he explained as Wilhelmina admired the intricate patterns he'd burned into the wood. "My mother made one like it for my little sister." "It's perfect," she told him, touched by the young man's thoughtfulness. "Our child will be honored to sleep in something so beautiful." As winter gave way to spring, Wilhelmina's body changed, her pregnancy becoming more visible with each passing week. Isaac was endearingly protective, insisting she rest more often and taking over some of her household duties despite her protests that she wasn't an invalid. "Humor me," he would say, kissing her forehead when she objected to his hovering. "I've waited too long for this happiness to take any chances with it." April showers brought the wildflowers for which the hill country was famous, carpeting the ranch's pastures in bluebonnets, Indian paintbrush, and Mexican hat. Wilhelmina spent hours in the garden she'd revitalized, planting vegetables for the coming summer and dreaming of the day she would teach their child the names of all the growing things. One perfect spring afternoon, as she worked among the young tomato plants, a rider appeared on the road leading to the ranch. Something about the horse's gait caught her attention, and she straightened, one hand instinctively going to her swollen abdomen. As the rider drew closer, her suspicions were confirmed. It was Bertram Wells, the banker who had seized her home and shop after Roland's desertion. Wilhelmina considered calling for Isaac, who was working in the barn, but decided against it. She was no longer the desperate, frightened woman who had stood on an auction block. She was Wilhelmina Jameson now, mistress of this ranch and carrying the next generation of the family. She could face one unpleasant banker without assistance. "Mrs. Jameson," Wells greeted her as he dismounted, his tone carefully neutral. "You're looking well." "Mr. Wells," she acknowledged with a slight nod. "What brings you out this way? Isaac isn't expecting you as far as I know." "No, For once, the normally confident banker seemed at a loss. "I actually came to see you. May we speak privately?" Curious despite her wariness, Wilhelmina gestured toward the garden bench beneath an apple tree. "We can sit here. My husband will be along shortly." Wells glanced toward the barn nervously but followed her to the bench. Once seated, he removed his hat, turning it awkwardly in his hands. "I've come to apologize, Mrs. Jameson. My behavior when we last met in town was inexcusable." Of all the things she might have expected, an apology was not among them. "What prompted this sudden attack of conscience, Mr. Wells?" He grimaced at her directness. "Several things. My wife, for one. When she heard how I'd spoken to you, she was displeased. And then there's the matter of your former husband." Wilhelmina stiffened. "What about Roland?" "Word reached us last week. He was killed in a card game in Monterey, apparently accused of cheating, which—" Wells shrugged. Well, knowing Davies, it wasn't an unfounded accusation. The news should have affected her more, Wilhelmina thought. But she felt only a distant sadness for the waste of a life that had once been intertwined with hers. "I'm sorry to hear that," she said simply. "There's more," Wells continued. "Before he left Texas, Davies confessed to me that he had been systematically embezzling from the store accounts for years. The debts he left behind were largely of his own creation, not business failures as he led everyone to believe." The banker looked genuinely uncomfortable now. "Which means that the seizure of your home and shop was legally questionable." Now he had her full attention. "What are you saying, Mr. Wells?" "I'm saying that the bank owes you restitution." He reached into his jacket and withdrew an envelope. "This contains a bank draft for the full value of the store inventory that was liquidated, plus interest. It's not enough to make up for what happened to you, but—" Wilhelmina took the envelope with numb fingers. "Why now? Why not when it might have saved me from—" She couldn't bring herself to finish the sentence. Wells had the grace to look ashamed. "By the time Davies confessed, you had already been. The auction had already occurred, and then you seemed settled here with Jameson. I convinced myself it was best to leave well enough alone." He met her eyes directly for the first time. "But my wife made me see that was cowardice, not consideration. You deserved to know the truth and to receive what was rightfully yours all along." Before Wilhelmina could respond, Isaac's voice came from behind them. "Everything all right here?" His tone was pleasant, but there was steel beneath it as he approached, eyeing Wells with unconcealed suspicion. "Mr. Jameson," Wells acknowledged, standing quickly. "I was just explaining to your wife about some financial matters regarding her former husband." Isaac came to stand beside Wilhelmina, his hand resting protectively on her shoulder. "And what matters would those be?" Wilhelmina handed him the envelope. "Apparently, Roland confessed to embezzlement before he fled to Mexico. The bank is offering restitution for the improper seizure of my property." Isaac's eyebrows rose as he examined the bank draft. "This is a considerable sum." Wells nodded. "It's what is owed with interest." He replaced his hat, clearly eager to depart now that his mission was complete. "I should be getting back to town. Again, Mrs. Jameson, my apologies for everything." They watched him ride away in silence. When he was out of sight, Isaac turned to Wilhelmina, concern etched on his features. "Are you all right? That was quite a shock, I imagine." She considered the question carefully. "I'm not sure how I feel about Roland's death. Sad, I suppose, but in an abstract way. As for the money—" She placed her hand over his where it still rested on her shoulder. "It changes nothing about us, about our life together. But it does feel like justice in a way." Isaac nodded thoughtfully. "It's rightfully yours. You could use it to open a new shop in town if you wanted, or save it for our child's future." The fact that he immediately thought of her independence, of her having choices, only reinforced how different he was from Roland, how lucky she was to have found him. "Our child's future," she decided, smiling up at him. "And perhaps a bit set aside for expanding the garden. I've been thinking about trying some fruit trees along the southern fence." Isaac laughed, pulling her gently to her feet and into his arms. "Always planning, aren't you? Our child will have your determination, I hope. And your kindness," she added, resting her head against his chest. "Your integrity." As they walked back to the house together, Wilhelmina reflected on the strange twists of fate that had brought her to this moment. If Roland hadn't abandoned her, if Wells hadn't seized her property, if she hadn't ended up on that auction block, she would never have found her way to Isaac, to this ranch, to the life that now felt as if it had always been meant for her. "Any man who leaves you is a fool," Isaac had said that first day. The words came back to her now as a simple truth. Roland's foolishness had been her salvation in the end. Summer arrived with blazing heat and the promise of new life. In the early hours of a June morning in 1879, after a labor that tested even Wilhelmina's considerable strength, their son was born, a healthy boy with his father's dark hair and his mother's determined chin. William Isaac Jameson, they named him, a tribute to both their families and a promise for the future. As Wilhelmina held her son in the bed she shared with Isaac, her husband's arm around them both, she thought of the journey that had brought her here, from the depths of betrayal and humiliation to the heights of joy she now experienced. "What are you thinking about?" Isaac asked softly, gazing down at their child with wonder. "About how sometimes the worst day of your life can lead to the best," she replied, turning her face to his. "If I hadn't been on that auction block last summer, I would have found you somehow," Isaac said with quiet certainty. "Some things are meant to be, Willa. We were meant to be." And as their son's tiny hand wrapped around his father's finger, as the morning light streamed through the window of the home they had built together, Wilhelmina Jameson knew with absolute certainty that her husband was right. Some things, even the most unlikely, most seemingly tragic beginnings, were indeed meant to be. Epilogue: 5 years later, the Jameson Ranch flourished under the care of its growing family. William, now a sturdy 5-year-old with his father's thoughtful nature and his mother's quick mind, had been joined by a 3-year-old sister, Emma, whose laugh could brighten even the darkest day. A third child was on the way, do with the autumn leaves. The garden that had first brought Isaac and Wilhelmina together had expanded into a small orchard. Apple and peach trees lined the southern fence, their spring blossoms giving way to summer fruit that Wilhelmina preserved for winter use and sold at the small farmer's market that had begun in Shafter. Thomas remained with them, no longer just a ranch hand but Isaac's foreman and partner in many ways. He had his own small cabin now, where he sometimes hosted his Comanche relatives, creating a bridge between cultures that benefited everyone. Wilhelmina had used a portion of Wells' restitution money to establish a small lending library in town, housed in what had once been her general store. She visited weekly to exchange books and sometimes teach reading to the children of ranch hands and townspeople alike. The community that had once witnessed her greatest humiliation now regarded her with respect bordering on admiration. On this particular summer evening, as the family gathered on the porch after supper, William looked up from the book Isaac was reading to him and asked a question that caught both parents by surprise. "Papa, how did you and Mama meet?" Isaac and Wilhelmina exchanged glances over their son's head. They had never hidden the truth of their beginnings, but neither had they shared the full story with their children, who were still too young to understand its complexities. "Well," Isaac began carefully, "I saw your mama in town one day and thought she was the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen." "Was she selling books then?" William asked, his concept of his mother shaped by her current activities. "No, not books," Isaac said with a small smile. "She was in need of help, and I was fortunate enough to be in a position to offer that help." "Like when you help Mr. Peterson fix his fence when the storm knocks it down," William persisted, trying to understand. "Something like that," Wilhelmina interjected, shifting Emma on her lap. "Your papa was very kind to me when I needed kindness most. And then you got married." Emma asked sleepily. "Not right away," Isaac answered, his eyes meeting Wilhelmina's over their children's heads. "First your mama came to live here and helped make this house a real home again. She planted the garden and made wonderful meals and taught me to see beauty in things I'd forgotten to notice. And your papa showed me what it means to be truly respected," Wilhelmina added softly, "to be valued for who I am, not just what I could do." William yawned, the complexities of adult relationships beyond his comprehension for now. "I'm glad you met," he said simply. "So am I, son," Isaac replied, ruffling the boy's dark hair. "More than you can possibly understand." Later, after the children were asleep and Isaac and Wilhelmina sat alone on the porch as they had so many evenings before, he took her hand in his. "Should we tell them the whole story someday?" he asked. "About the auction, about Roland?" Wilhelmina considered the question seriously. "Yes," she decided. "When they're old enough to understand, I want them to know that life can change in an instant for worse, but also for better. That what looks like an ending can actually be a beginning." Isaac nodded. "And that sometimes, the thing that seems like your greatest shame can lead to your greatest joy." "Exactly." She leaned against his shoulder, feeling the gentle swell of their unborn child between them. "Though I hope they never have to learn those lessons the hard way, as we did." "They'll have their own challenges," Isaac said philosophically, "but they'll face them with the strength they've inherited from you." Wilhelmina smiled, thinking of how far she had come from that terrified woman on the auction block. "And the kindness they've inherited from you. Together, that's a powerful combination." As the stars appeared above the Texas hills, and the distant lowing of cattle mingled with the chirping of crickets, Isaac and Wilhelmina Jameson sat in the peaceful silence of two people who had found in each other exactly what they needed, not through easy paths or fairy tale beginnings, but through the messy, complicated journey of real life and real love. And in the end, that made their happiness all the sweeter.